This video is going to be about the antique points, also known as the Shu transporting points. And the Shu is the same character as in back Shu, the Shu stream point, which means to transport and to convey. And these points are all located distally from the elbows to the fingertips, as well as distal to the knees, all the way to the tips of the toes. And these consist of the bread and butter points that we use in our acupuncture treatments, as you well know from your treatments in the clinic. It's interesting to me that the area of the brain, the cortex, the density of the neurons that's devoted to this area, the arms, the hands and fingers, as well as the lower legs and the feet and the toes. It's interesting that that the amount of tissue in the cerebral cortex that's devoted to sensing these areas is significantly larger than any other place on the body except for the face and the genital region. I'm going to include a link that you can actually see an image of this as if the human body were drawn by virtue of how much neurons and how much tissue was devoted to that. So I think that there's something interesting that the ancients knew when they tapped into the use of these points or manipulating or stimulating these areas of the body. I think that they realized on some level that these points in this area gave them more bang for the buck. So on the yin organs, the yin channels, there are 5 Shu points, and on the yang channels, there are 6, because in the yang channels, they also include the yuan source points, in addition to all of the element points with which we're familiar. So these points were first described in the Ling Shu, right in chapter 1, right from the get-go, and these describe the movement of qi through the Sheng cycle, or the Wu Xing. They compare the flow of qi that moves through our body like that of water flowing through the course of a river. And interestingly enough, these were all considered to be moving proximally, that is, away from the tips of the fingers and toes, and towards the elbows and towards the knees, proximally towards the center of the body. Later on, it's thought that the numeric system was developed after Chinese civilization became a little bit more sophisticated and agrarian, and their agrarian system became more developed in terms of the reflection of how they, in terms of Dedman, he quotes, that emphasize the control and conservation of water through rivers, reservoirs, irrigation canals, ditches, etc., as well as the 6-channel system with which you're familiar, I'm sure, which is Taiyang, small intestine bladder, and Xiaoyang, gallbladder, triple heater, and so forth. So it can be easily debated forever, what's the correct direction of the flow of qi through the channels. But as we stand between heaven and earth, right, in terms of the Chinese anatomical positioning, heaven comes in and descends through the hands, and earth comes up through the feet and moves towards the center of the body. And this was considered to be not necessarily emphasis on the direction of flow, but more like the quality of movement that is exemplified by each of these points as they move from the extremities, the most distal, to the elbow and knees, which are the relatively more proximal. So again, this is more about the quality of the flow and not just the direction of the flow. Remember, in the ancient times, they didn't really have a numerical system. That was developed later, especially after a great deal of interaction with the West. In the beginning, it was just a bunch of names along the trajectory of a channel. And even some of the points changed from channel to channel. So it wasn't so much about the direction of flow, but again, more about the quality of the movement and the nature and the functionality of these points and how they affected our function on an external level and an internal level. So as you know, the antique Shu points are known as the Jingwell, the Ying Spring, the Shu Stream, the Ying River, and the Hesi. And again, the Yang meridians also included the Yuan source point, but these are not used in quite the same way as the element points that we use in constitutional 5-element acupuncture. These were considered to be, more than just the elemental representation. So at each point along the proximal progression of the channel, the qi is said to change in terms of the quality of its movement and the nature and therefore its function. So over time, additional indications were ascribed to each type of point. And so what follows now is an amalgamation of material from the Neijing, the Nanjing, and the Jiayi Jing. And for a more detailed listing of the indications of each of the points, you can see Deadman, pages 32 through 37. So we'll start with the Jingwell point. On the yang meridians, it's a metal point, and on the yin meridians, it's a wood point. And this is said to be where the qi first rises out of the depths. This is where life is beginning to appear, arising out of the formless chaos. And life emerges and then begins to move in a small but powerful way. And so this journey will continue until the Husi points at the elbow and knees. And this is where the Husi points is said to where we rejoin the inner being by descending into the miasma of the depths. So the character for Jing does indeed indicate a well, and it's interesting that this well is located in the center section of a field that's been divided up into 9 parts. And the center section is left fallow, and this was where the well was set up, and this was said to represent home because you wanted the well, the source of water, close to where you were living so you could access it more easily. So as you know, this is when the qi, or where the qi begins to rise at the surface very powerfully, moves upward forcefully and outward very quickly, and it's used to, and when it's used clinically, it's capitalizing on this momentum. So this is why it's said, since it is the most exterior of the point, including towards the extremities, to be able to push things out, and particularly pathogenic factors. When they're bled, they can be particularly useful in expelling blood heat and exuberant heat at the surface. So these are great for pushing pathogens out to the exterior and obviously for clearing heat. And they're also used for the mental agitation. They are said to be particularly effective at stimulating the opening of the sensory orifices, which is our sense organs. And obviously, one of the biggest things that can occlude our sense organs, that can get in the way of us hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting, and just about, in a basic way, using our mental faculties in a clear way, is heat, especially blood heat and phlegm that's obscuring the sensory orifices, which can be evacuated through the movement of the blood and a powerful movement of the qi to the exterior. So these are said to awaken consciousness. So obviously these are good points to be used when somebody is not very clear in themselves, when they're not really connected to how they're interacting with the outside world. This could be somebody that's extremely reactive. And again, think about reactivity as a quality or a manifestation of exuberant heat that interferes with our heart's Shen's ability to be present and aware and responsive rather than just reactive. So these are said to be for mental problems and delirium, as I mentioned, with exuberant heat. And this is also said to release full obstructions in the sinew channel. So to activate the sinew meridian, which is said to be the intersection of the sinew meridians only at the Jingwell point, but can be manipulated in other points, and we'll get to that in another lecture. But these can be bled to stimulate the movement of the qi and the circulation of the qi through the sinew meridian. And again, the qi in the sinew meridian doesn't so much flow as it does circulate. This is also said to be useful for any liver problems, and that's probably because of the relationship between the sinew and the fascia, and the sinews and the muscles and the tendons, and their relationship with the wood organs, as well as dealing with things that are stored in the blood, right, as the liver official stores the blood. So this is said to safeguard the exterior, and therefore it's really good for acute problems. And it says, I said, it strongly expels external pathogenic factors. Later on, it was suggested to needle in the wintertime, and said to be for diseases of the zang organs, as well as a fullness below the heart. And so what they mean by fullness below the heart is actually the area of the epigastrium which is bordered at the top around CV16 at the bottom of the sternum, continues down to about maybe CV10 or so, and out to the stomach line around stomach 27 or so and upwards, maybe the edge of the liver meridian itself. So anything that's affecting the epigastrium, that's upsetting the stomach, uh, is also upsetting this little area called the Gao Huang Shu, which is the area between the stomach and the heart. And this is said to be when full, when the qi is stuck or stagnant in this area, or an accumulation of heat or phlegm, can disturb the heart official, which again relates to how we perceive the world and our ability to be sensible in the world and present to it. So this is said to be anything where somebody feels a lot of fullness in the heart. And I also think about, digestive related anxiety. That's a very common thing. So not just in the upper chest, but a lot of people feel, this running piglet syndrome where qi is moving upwardly through the chest from the epigastrium, and they often feel a sense of fullness or tension, although most people don't realize it until you actually begin to ask into that very specifically. So that's the Jingwell point. The next we have is the Ying Spring point, which is the water point on the Yang meridians, and the fire point on the Yin meridians. So interestingly enough, as the water point and the fire point, which makes sense in terms of the Yang's ability to process, so the ability to fight sort of fire with water, and then for the Yin organs, the ability to fight fire with fire, to clear that heat that the Yin officials, whose nature is often to store, this helps them to transform that heat and move it out. And with the Yang meridians, that's more about bringing the qualities of coolness to that, as well as clearing. So this is said to be where the qi glides and it starts to flow more rapidly through the channel. It's said to be swift and slippery. So the qi is very dynamic here. And again, this is more about movement than substance yet, right? Substance begins to be a factor more with the shoestring points, which we'll get to. This again is more about a little bit more, relatively more oriented towards the exterior. It's only the second point in this order, and this is also said to be a good point to treat for disorders of the the Zang channels, the Yin organs, and they often combine it with the Shu stream point to treat disorders of the Zang Yin organs. This is excellent also expelling pathogenic factors, though primarily heat. With the Jingwell, you have more heat and wind and maybe the beginnings of cold, right? You can think about the Taiyang stage of disease where you're experiencing an invasion of wind and cold. This is more about wind and heat. The pathogen has gotten a little bit further in, as well as if you think about the way we deal with things emotionally, first maybe something comes and triggers us and we're able to just kind of brush it off, no big deal. I can expel it, as it were, by not even so much expelling it as I'm not even letting it get in. I'm not even letting it get under my skin. But some things do find their way under our skin, right? As much as we would like them not to. And so once it starts to engage with our Wei Qi, our reactivity, then heat is manifested after this sort of battle is joined between our Wei Qi and whatever it is this pathogenic factor is, either on a physical level or an emotional level. So here things get under our skin a little bit more and they start to generate a little bit heat, and this is when irritability begins to set in. So on a physical level, we see this is where when fevers begin to affect the body, especially the upper part of the body. And this is also very good for any type of inflammation, any kind of itis that's affecting the body. So you think about arthritis, hepatitis, something that might be in the exterior, but also starting to lodge into the interior. Because again, everything doesn't progress in a very simple, logical, linear way. So it's any kind of itis or inflammation. This is a fantastic point to treat for that, to help the body to push that heat out and to unknot the qi that's located at the surface and the exterior. This is also said to be for conditions when the tissue changes color. And what they're talking about is the heat effusion that occurs when we're experiencing fevers and the exuberant heat is starting to build up and the face goes from a more pale color to a more reddish color, right? So this is when the tissue changes color. Also think about different areas of the skin, particularly the hands and feet, that are becoming red from an invasion of wind and cold that's turned into heat, or an invasion of wind heat itself. So this is also good for sudden heat. Think about sunburn, right? Obviously, the skin changes color, for most of us, that is, depending on the skin tone, of course. And this is also when there's sudden bleeding, especially good for sore and hot throats, as well as to be considered for heart problems. So think about one of the things that exacerbates and harasses the heart is heat, generally more than just about any other climatic factor. So this is also said to help safeguard the exterior, although at a slightly more internal level, and is also good for acute conditions. And it's said to invigorate the yang qi of the yin. So again, that's the ability of the yin organs to summon its protector and protecting forces to help push out anything that's just starting to invade and get in under the surface. So next we have the Shu stream points, which are the wood points on the yang meridians and the earth points on the yin meridians. It's also the Yuan source chi point on the yin meridians, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. But this is said to be where the chi pours through. It's now said to be able to carry something and to carry something new via the chi in the blood. It now has more depth, it has more width and breadth, and it's able to, you could say that the river has gotten wide enough and deep enough where it can really carry things through the channel. And this is the first point at which you can do that. It's not just about venting things out or pushing things out. This is now gives us the capacity, as in gives us the resources of chi and blood to really move something. This is also said to be the fulcrum, the third of 5 points, right? So there's 2 more distal and there's 2 more proximal. So this is said to be the fulcrum between the interior and the exterior. And interestingly enough, for the yin officials, it's the earth point, and earth moderates transitions, especially between the periphery and the center, right? So this is already about something that's being balanced, and earth is a harmonizing, stabilizing, and centering force, very much like a fulcrum. This helps us to kind of find some evenness in the seesaws of our experience, right? Things come in from the outside, we're able to just toss them away, shrug them off, no problem. Sometimes things get in and irritate us a little bit, but we're able to sort of think our way through it or respond very quickly where it's no longer affecting us. We can bring the shin of the heart to it and say, no, on second thought, this isn't really worth the effort, or, oh, I have an understanding of this. I can integrate it and just let go of what is bothering me and move on and focus my attention, again, shen, attention on something more important. But now something has gotten to the point where it's sort of half inside, half outside. We haven't been able to really just reactively shrug it off. We haven't been able to just remove it with a little bit of thought. Now we're ruminating on it, right? This is on the yin officials, it's the earth point. So this has a lot to do with our ability to think things through, to really ponder something. We don't have an easy answer. We don't have an easy solution. So this is going to require a little more thought, a little more of our mental faculties, maybe a little bit more strategizing. Again, think about planning that is representative of the wood, because on the yang officials, it's the wood point. Also dealing with things that are now significant obstacles, not just a little bump in the road or something that's easily moved over, right? Or passed through or cleverly passed around. Now, with the wood, the yang, we're engaging with it, and it requires some decisions to be made, right? We have to use the mental faculties, our yi, but also we have to utilize our ability to plan and strategize and make wise decisions. So this is also said to be where the chi begins to gather with some more substance of chi and blood to move something and transport something either inward or outward, right? Because maybe we want to decide to take something in, or maybe we realize that, this is nourishing for us. It looks a little bit unsavory at first, but On second thought, and maybe on third or fourth thought, we realize, you know what, actually, this is something that might nourish me. I don't really like the smell of broccoli. It's not my thing. It tastes it's a little funny, a little bitter. But you know what? I actually feel really good after I eat it. So this is a good example of, oh yeah, I want to take that in. I don't have to necessarily expel everything uh, and push away everything that comes to me in life, right? We would be very lonely and unevolved people if that were to happen. So since the first and second points are really more about warding off and pushing out, these are also useful for pathogenic factors, pathological factors that are entering the body. And one of the ways that it enters it from the outside is through the skin and into the joints. So this is also said to be really good for pain, heaviness or dampness in the body. Again, think about the relationship between wood and earth. They both deal a lot with dampness and a little bit with heat. And one of the easiest places to get into the exterior of the body is the joints, which is also under the purview of the sinews and therefore the wood. And so these are also about conditions that alternate from getting better and getting worse, or symptoms that maybe not get better or worse, but just change in intensity or severity. So it's not like it goes away and comes back, or it flares up and then it's dormant. These are things that maybe are always there, but they sometimes get worse or maybe a little less worse, uh, especially in terms of changes with the weather. Again, think about the relationship between the wood and the earth. Wood really helps us to adapt to change, and earth helps and to be flexible with change and to things that necessarily that look at the surface to be like obstacles. And earth also helps us to be grounded and thoughtful, and not just react. Right? We don't want to just go no. Right? We don't want to be reactive. We want to be benevolent. We also want to be thoughtful and see that you know. Maybe I have a little more control over this than I thought, but I have to really think this through, and I also have to sit with it, right? So this is also said to be useful for spleen channel problems, right? Okay, so moving on to the Jing River point, it's the fire point on the yang officials and the metal point on the yin officials and those meridians, and this is said to be where the qi flows. Um, this Jing of the Jing River is not like the Jing well. This Jing means to pass through and implies a transition from one place to another. So the Qi here is moving a little more slowly. The river has gotten a little wider. The river has gotten a little deeper. And so the water is moving a little slower, but with more force, more power, and more substance. It's carrying more with it. It's not just water. It can, like the Shu stream point, which is starting to be able to carry debris and sediments, right? That's why it's good for arthritis. It's good for things that create blockages in the channel. Um, this is now able to move things that have become even more established into the body, as well as the mind and the spirit. So it's said that the chi in this point accesses a lot more power that's growing in immensity. And it also said to have the power to divert pathogenic factors to the sinews and into the joints, away from the vital organs, because in the animal wisdom of your body, it would rather you have arthritis than hepatitis, right? It would rather have you suffer discomfort in your muscles than in your internal organs or in the interstitial spaces in the trunk, right? So in a way, it has its own wisdom to dealing with this. Again, metal is cooling. It's what stimulates the water, and metal, as you know, if you touch it at room temperature, it's often cooler than the air around it. And also on the yang meridians, this represents the fire point. So this is the ability to warm things that have become lodged in the deeper levels and have become inert and more cold. So, to move it, it needs to be warmed, right? Metal, when it's too inert, becomes solid and unmovable, unmutable. You can't bend it to make anything, right? If you want to make a sword, you have to heat the metal up. If you want metal to flow, you have to warm it. If you want to be able to bend it, you have to be able to warm it, right? So similarly, the Zong organs, dealing with a lot of qi and processing, these require a little bit more heat to do their work. The stomach, the intestines, the large intestines, if there's too much cold in these organs, then they suffer. They can't really do their job. The yin organs, they need purity, and that's what the metal signifies. So when you've taken that step to take something in at a slightly deeper level than the Shu point, you have to make sure that it's of high quality, right? So whatever it is that you're taking in, be it a belief or a concept or an idea or a new practice to support your body, or a new, again, think about metal that the yin needs to give it the jewels and the gems, just like the heavy minerals and metals that give us the deep nourishment, right? That support our abilities, our body's ability to process things, right? We need a certain number of metals like chromium and other things to function. You know, they're not all toxic. So similarly, we need things that are very high quality to get the most out of our life, right? But we also need the fire and the shen that provides to recognize that quality. So this is said to, again, as I said, to have the power to divert pathogenic factors away from the internal organs into the sinews, into the joints, even into the bones. And so the symptomatology that relates to this might be characterized as wandering pain in the joints. You know, some days people feel it in their knuckles, then they feel it in their wrists, and then they feel it in their elbows, and then they feel it in their knees, and sometimes they feel it in their hips, right? So this is a really great point category to use in those situations. So likewise, they are indicated for treating problems with the sinews and the bones. They're also in relationship to metal, right? Because the lungs, and these are said to relate to diseases of the lung channel. And the lung needs a certain amount of warmth, and it also needs a certain amount of purity. And again, we have the relationship between the yang fire and yin metal points. And so this is said to be anything for wheezing, anything like wheezing, coughing, lung diseases, lung channel problems, maybe pain along the lung channel, difficulty exhaling, right? It's also said to affect the voice and to be useful for any conditions affecting the voice. So some people notice, you know, that they have a weaker voice, that they have a more raspy voice than normal. This would be a great point to treat for that. Also, I have one patient that actually ended up getting infected um, by it's interestingly enough by wolf scat. That was a wolf apparently. Yeah, or no, coyote. Excuse me, coyote, not a wolf. Coyote scat. He had ended up inadvertently breathing the fur in, and maybe some germs from the scat that had gotten in his garage because he lives in a rural area. And for a long period of time, he had a lot of injury to his throat, and he could never really fully clear his throat. And repetitive treatment of points, the river points, really helped with that, especially with the phlegm and bringing qi to the throat and allowing the qi to move through the throat more easily. So this is also said to be useful in co-cycle related treatments. So this would be when one element, one official is overacting on another element, such as liver overacting on spleen, or water overacting on fire, or fire, especially fire overacting on metal. So lastly, we have the He points, which is the earth point on the yang meridian and the water point on the yin meridian. And so these are points where it's said that the qi is now going inwards. He in this case, and He doesn't just mean see, it means also to unite. So this is about the qi moving in a centripetal way, downwards and inwards into the body, into the depth, back to join the qi of the body. On another level, it's said to be representative of our being returning to the oneness, right? And so, in one sense, our body, which is relatively young, that is said to return to the earth. And on the yin, on the jing level, right, we're returning back to our source. Okay, so this is said to be a quality of qi that's very vast and deep here. It's important for chronic conditions, especially ones that are affecting the internal organs, because these are said to unite with the qi of the organs. And so these are much less about movement and much more about stability. right? So, and it's about returning to the depths of who we are. So sometimes um, we find ourselves in unique circumstances or new circumstances, either by choice or by happenstance. Um, and as we move through the progression of the points up the channel, you know, we've decided to let something in, or something has forced its way in. Circumstances have thrust themselves upon us, and we've gone through all the steps outlined before as representative of each of these points. And now we find ourselves where we're sort of at the core of our being, um, where we have to make not just a decision about what to do, but how to be with something. And at some point, we either have to take a stand and use the faculties that were given to us to be thoughtful about how to be, not so much what to do, as well as how do we surrender and really go with the flow of things and really allow ourselves to be freely surrendered to the unknown, because there are some things we just can't control, unfortunately. But then again, fortunately, because if you could control everything, your life would probably be pretty boring. And if you always knew what was about to happen to this earthy substance, if there was never any doubt about what our future had in store for us, our life would be miserably boring. Imagine waking up in the start of the day and you knew exactly what was going to happen every moment of the day, no surprises, no unknown. I don't know about you, but I would want to blow my brains out. There's no way I'd want to go through life like that. So, how do we find our stability in the midst of the unknown, right? Earth, water relate to each other in that way. And also, when we find our true nature, right? What does this piece of earth, what is this really about? You know, I'm more than my thoughts. I am this body, this earthy body, because we're more body than spirit on the outside, right? We're more substantial. This is our center. We are actually at the center of our world. We're actually at the center of our universe, and rightly so. But we shouldn't be only about ourselves, right? We have to also be able to go with the flow of the river of life and connect to something deeper, where we connect with the abyss or the void of the oneness, where we connect to all humanity. So we're not just our own little island of Earth in this sea of humanity. We are one small integral part in the sea of humanity. So, a vital part to be sure, but we also have to be able to be thoughtful about how to be with the unknown. And the best way to be with the unknown is with trust and faith, by getting to know who you really are, not just your thoughts, but your essence. What is it that you really love? What is it that you have a natural inclination for? As Rumi said, let yourself be silently drawn by the stronger pull of what you really love. That there's the centripetal action of this point that brings us down into the whirlpool of the unknown, into the abyss. But what's there really is more of ourselves, because if you look into your depths, what you see are your virtues. And that's what gives you ground to stand on. That's what helps you to feel more stable in your life. And so you have to really let yourself surrender and go with the flow and not trying to control everything and hold on to everything into your center. Sometimes we have to really let ourselves be moved. And in a way, that movement actually gives us more stability. It's like riding a bicycle. If you're just sitting on the bicycle without the kickstand up and you're not moving, you're going to fall over. If you're walking and you're just walking on one foot, hopping along, you're going to be very unstable. You have to actually be in motion to be more at ease and to feel more stable, because we are on a ride around this sun, and the earth is spinning, and the earth is not just spinning, but it's revolving around a sun, and that sun is revolving around the center of our galaxy. I mean, it's one cyclical circle after another. And so what actually gives us stability is a constant speed and rotation. So this is where the stability comes in. So this allows us to experience a certain constancy of flow. We don't want to run too fast. We don't want to get unstable and lose our footing. We want to really go at the pace of life that life is pacing for us. Yes, we need to make decisions about how to move forward, but There's a way in which we can be thoughtfully in surrender and just allow ourselves to go with the flow of the speed of life. And when we go too fast, we become unstable and we also experience more internal organ problems. So, how do you return to the depth of who you are? It's by um, being thoughtful, by being aware, and also surrendering to the unknown, because not every unknown thing is a problem. So that's good advice for all of us. Thank you.